and talk about organizational assessments and baseline portfolio. And I think, Barbara, you're on leading up for this one. Thank you.
Yep. So for this one, I really want to talk about kind of looking internally at your team. And is your team ready to go? So does your organization have the required skill sets? Do you have the staff on board that you need? And if you don't, where are your gaps? What are your skill sets that you need? Chi, who works for me, as she said, one of the first things we did really early on was look at, we know we have to have a service center, so what skills do we need right now at the beginning? Where do we need to be in 5 years when we're at the end of the project? And how do we fill the gaps in between to get there? And that was one of the very first tasks that we did really early on, because we knew we had to fill those, we had to find those people, fill those gaps, and try and make sure that we were hiring for the right skill sets as we went. So look at your team, as soon as you sign that contract, start looking at your team and figuring out, do you have those resources? And if you don't, where are you going to get them? And how are you going to get them trained? Are your people ready? Do you have a vendor management office who knows the contract inside and out? Do they have their tracking tools set up so that they can manage that contract? Or do they know how to monitor the deliverables and make sure that they're on time? And are they, do you have a vendor accountability plan in place so that you are managing your vendor? Do you have a business team put together who knows what they're doing? Do they, with deliverables, do they know what to expect in the deliverables? Have them do some research so that they know what a deliverable should look like. If you're getting a deliverable on, business process X, what should a deliverable like that look like? Have them do some research and find out, because it's hard when a team that has never really done this, that type of most of us are doing projects we've never done before. We don't usually repeat projects. So when you have a business team who your business SMEs who, and even your technical SMEs who haven't done that type of project get a deliverable, they often don't know what the contents are supposed to be. So, are they ready? How do they get ready? How do they understand what should be in a deliverable? And, going back to the skill set, will they be able to sustain the project? And we talked a little bit earlier about, will we have the staffing available in the end to sustain it? And then your data. How do you make sure that your data is clean? And, it doesn't matter how big your project is, whether it's a small internal project or whether it's like mine where it's gigantic with 200 departments, your data and anything you're moving from a legacy system into something new, you've got to figure out where it is, what it is, and is it clean, and how are you going to get it? You need to know if your business processes, what they are now, and what are they going to be. And if you've figured out what your requirements are and what you're doing and you've signed your contract, during that time while you're waiting for your vendor to come on is a good time to really start looking at, what do we have? Do we know anything about our data right now? And can we start really looking at what steps can we start taking right then to start looking at really starting to take some steps? Can we coach our divisions along in how to start working on looking at their data? System documentation, build a library. Start working on your library of information that your vendor might need. What are your as-is vendor? What are your as-is business processes? What are your legacy systems? What are your data mapping? Where are those things at? Put them all in a library that's easy access for your vendor. Another, I think, really important thing to look at when you're waiting for your vendor to arrive is really your budget. So you put together a budget, you've gone through your process, you've signed your contract, you're waiting for your vendor, but if you're like most of us, you've also are sitting there waiting for a legislative approval. You're waiting for your money to come. And you may or may not have to do a special project report at that time. You've signed a contract for a certain amount of money, but there's a delay happening because you're waiting for a legislative approval. Do you have a contingency plan? What if that delay is longer than you think? What if your SPR doesn't get approved right away? What if the legislature doesn't approve your control section 11 and you have to wait for the budget to be enacted in order to actually have your contractor come on? Do you have a contingency plan? Do you know what the backup is? What is the impact on your contract? Those are all things that you can start really thinking about really early on and start really thinking about how will that impact my project and what can we do? And can we start building in the contingency plan and start taking steps to work on that up front before it has that impact on the project? Because you don't want to come out first thing and say, okay, well, we're already delayed 6 months. So, you know, what can you do to help prevent that? So for us, you know, one of the things we knew already, we signed, we had to do a special project report for FisCal after we signed our contract. So we selected our vendor. It came out in March, but we knew that we weren't going to be able to sign a contract until June at the earliest. Well, our original contract proposal had a July go live. We're like, okay, that obviously can't happen. So the first thing we had to do was start meeting with the vendor. So what can we do? What are options that we can do and start talking about? And so we had to do some renegotiating on the contract. And so we had to have a contract amendment before we could even, you know, really move forward on what was it. And that was sort of how we ended up with our pre-wave that went live last July. So it was that contingency plan negotiations that we were already having before the vendor even came on site. So, you know, those are the types of things that you really want to look at, that assessment of just your internal team, your contract, your readiness, and potential delays or things that may come up. So again, you know, open it up to you guys. Have you had those experiences? And if you have, how have you encountered them? How have you addressed them? Especially the budget delay with the legislature contingency plans. If you guys had those problems, and how have you helped your project along to be successful?
So nobody's had a budget delay, huh?
Nobody?
Awesome. I want all your business cards.
No kidding.
Well, while they're thinking, I guess I can add a couple
Okay.
things. One is, we see a lot of people when they're developing their portfolios now to make sure that they have all their business rules in it. Makes it, especially with the number of people we have retiring from the state right now, having a portfolio of what your business rules are for your legacy systems is becoming more and more important, especially as you're pulling them out or you're changing your system. I have one slight caution for you guys, and only because I've sat on both sides. Be careful about what you put in your bidder's library. When you have conflicting information in there because you want to put everything in there with what your requirements are, you give vendors an opening that you really don't want because they're saying, well, this was in the library. This is how I scaled. You want to make sure that whatever goes in your library is consistent with your requirements. And I know it takes more work for you up front, but don't build a library where you're saying, I'm just going to dump everything in the world in there. Make sure that whatever goes in your library that you want it, because you can end up in some kind of contractual issues that you really don't want to get into.
Very good.
So I'm taking really strong notes on this one.
Yeah, you're welcome.
More specifically, and that's exactly where my office is doing right now. We have a really big project that's coming up. I'm quite sure many of you may know about the Department of Healthcare Services. We are the Medi-Cal system. We provide Medi-Cal services to the state of California, at least all the beneficiaries. So one of the largest system we have is called MEDS, Medi-Cal Eligibility Data System. It is quite old, almost 40 years old.
And it's only a $5 million project.
Yes.
I'm not telling. At this point, you know, we're going through a process that we're starting to take a look at how do we keep the institutional knowledge while be able to sustain the project throughout its life cycle. How do we do that? So yes, we are starting to think about the business rule and capturing that information from all those folks who are dedicated to the department, have been with the department for 30 plus years. How do we mind melt with them so that we can actually capture that into a business rule so that it could be passed on to the next generation? And so as we go through that project, and that's the reason why I'm making really strong notes, be careful what we put into the library. So in this in this environment, we learn from each other. We learn from just kind of talking through things and being exposed to what to be cautious. And it's something that I think it's really important is to do your organizational assessment. Knowing what you don't know is just as important as finding out what you need to know.
At the risk of appearing really stupid, when you talk about business rules, are you talking about business processes? I'm not sure I understand what business rules are.
So, within our legacy system, it's a lot of times as the system grows, a lot of the rules, because it's in COBOL, it actually is embedded into the system itself. It's the rules of why you're doing certain things. If a person needs food stamp, what are the processes, or VoteCAL, what are the processes that you use to provide that eligibility to that individual, right? So it's actually translating, or at least it's the technical code that contains the business processes or the business requirements or the policies, depending on how deep your code is. Some of the newer systems may not have that, but definitely the legacy systems, especially if it's in COBOL, all the information are embedded. Even the comments are embedded into the particular program, right? So with that, it is very important for us to take every bit of information that's in those programs to really put it into an English language so that we could come back out and validate that information with our program area, with our stakeholders, with our external partners, so that we could say, yes, this is still the requirement that we need for the next system, the ones that we're going to be either modernizing or replacing.
Thank you.
Yep.
Daniel Perry from Open. So we were just talking about how do you keep staff and be able to grow staff and maintain the system. OTEC has that issue with mainframe. Mainframe is an old system, but very robust, and a lot of state departments still use it. And OTEC started implementing Mainframe Academy. And what they're doing is they're taking staff, and they understand that a lot of younger people, 20s, 30s, they don't even teach in college anymore. So they bring on new staff and put them through 3-month course, dedicating retired annuitants that have lots of knowledge to just train them. And by that, you're also giving people a sense that they're a part of the organization, not just, okay, I'm coming to work, I leave at 4 or 5 o'clock, and I actually have a part of something important that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's great.
And I would like to echo that a little bit. At healthcare services, with my first tour, I was overseeing the application system. So again, legacy applications. How do you move the legacy folks and keep them interested and motivated? So we have new technology projects. We move the individual, identify the individuals that are willing and motivated to learn the new technology, and then put them in so that they could actually work on the project and learn the new skill sets, and then move on to the next new project, so it's kind of like a rotation process while we train the individuals that are coming in new and working on the legacy systems, so that they're pairing up with folks that are still there, so that there's sustainability, but at the same time you actually train the new group of individuals so that they actually stay in the department and not find jobs elsewhere or outside of the department.
The problem with big projects, I worked on the PSR project at CalPERS, and a lot of times you bring in a vendor because you don't have the in-house specialty, and the vendors are told pretty much you're taking this whole project on. So it's like that picture. Imagine everyone on the right are all the vendors, and your staff are on the left. You got 2 actual people, and they have no idea what's actually going on. There's no knowledge transfer. Documentation is kind of at the end. So the last week, we got to document everything, and it's 30,000 foot level, and suddenly you're left holding the bag, and you don't know, is this a bug or a feature?
So, So, one of the things, when I talked about, does your vendor management office have the skills and the tools to track and monitor the contract? One of the things that we did that I think has been really helpful for our team, not just our VMO, but for our deputy directors as well, has been, we have a knowledge transfer requirement in our contract. We also have a lot of requirements within our deliverables for documentation, because we don't want that. We do have a requirement that we take over the system when we're done. We want to run it. We want to have our own service center and have the state operate the system when we're done. So we have actually taken all the roles and responsibilities out of the contract, put them into a spreadsheet, and on a quarterly basis, we send that out to our deputies, and they work with their Accenture counterparts, and we kind of say, okay, are you meeting your roles and responsibilities? Are the Accenture staff meeting theirs? Are the state staff meeting theirs? And we report back to our VMO through our deputies, through this agreement. Is everybody meeting what they're supposed to be doing? Are we doing state staff stepping up and getting the knowledge transfer and taking advantage of those opportunities and participating where they're supposed to be participating and learning where they're supposed to be learning? We have a knowledge transfer plan. Each individual has a personal learning plan. And it's not just the knowledge transfer, it's, all of the roles and responsibilities for the state, all the roles and responsibilities for the vendor. And like I said, on a quarterly basis, we send that back out to our deputy directors and have them weigh in as part of our contract management process to keep everybody sort of accountable on both sides. And I think that works well.
And I think to add on to that, another thing we did is to look at the NAFO and pull out all the roles that are defined by the vendor. And so, okay, the vendor tell us what activities will these roles be performing. And once we have that, then we start talking about the knowledge transfer.
Right.
And we report on monthly basis whether those knowledge transfers are happening. So that's kind of.
Well, I would like to also highlight the importance of what Barbara just shared with us. They really believe in it, so it goes all the way back up to the executive sponsor, how important it is to have knowledge transfer. So it goes back to what we all know. Sometimes when you set out to do the right testing and you set out the right length of time for testing, what usually typically happens at the end, you shrink it, right? Because you run out of time. So if you don't start that early and consistently apply that principle, then you really not doing your department a service. So it really, at that level, also require executive sponsorship.
Yeah, knowledge transfer can't happen in the last 2 months, right? It never will. Not on a system as big as PSR or anything the size of what we normally do. And it's a little bit like the tools and templates we talked about before, because you have to make sure both sides, your vendor and your staff, are participating in it and trying to get what they need to out of it. They're not just checking the box each month. Yes, we had lunch together. Yes, we had a few laughs. Yes, we talked about the system a little bit. And it really has to be on both sides. You have to have a vendor who's committed to doing that knowledge transfer and staff who feel an obligation to learn it and get to a point where they can use it. Okay, I'm going to start doing my job as facilitator and moving us along here. We hit all these points. Any more questions on these points? No? Now we're moving. Okay. We're on slide 13, which means we're halfway through. Okay, focus on the staffing process. So what the problem with getting projects staffed up is a lot of times the people you get are the ones who are available. And they're not the ones you want necessarily. And we have the same problem on the vendor side, right? We've had to fight for the resources because the good ones are hidden away underneath 3 layers of rocks. I checked with Kathy Kleek this morning to see if I could use her quote. Kathy Kleek has this great quote about this, which says that you better select the people you want to make decisions for your organization for the next 20 years. Because with the size of the systems that we're building, the folks you put on the project who are participating in requirements and are participating in design sessions and looking at how the system's going to work and telling the vendors how the business operates are the ones who are basically defining your business. So find the really good ones. So let's talk about the staffing process a little bit. I actually don't have my notes on who's going to start this one. Gerri is. Okay.
Because both of you and I love that quote, because what Kathy said, Kathy does talk about, she says, are you comfortable with the person that you gave me being assigned as a resource to make the decisions you're going to have to live with for 20 years? And they say, and she's actually gotten better people that way. No, not total, but she's actually got some better people. There's a couple things that I want to comment on to add to this, because there's a lot of things you have to do to staff right. Getting the right people in the right places throughout the organization is one of the major things that you have to do. And I don't know if I've ever been on the state side when I've heard any project manager ever say that they have enough resources for the project. You know that you're always short, okay? So you give that as a baseline. Then what are you gonna do? I think the one mistake that I see made is people want coverage over everything. And you know what? I think there's some things, if you're dealing with a project by yourself, you have to. If you're dealing with a project with a consultant, I would assess certain areas and say, you know what, even though I'm gonna have a high level of oversight over that, I'm not gonna staff that, because I have scarce resources and I wanna place my bets. And my bets are gonna be where I can best learn and figure out how to manage the project by my own later on. And if I take those scarce resources and move them around and I'm too thin, I don't get any of that at the end. I'm thin and not enough deep to manage the project. So place your bets is one piece of advice that I would talk about. The other thing is there's certain functions that even though you can't go all the way down maybe, I would never give up. And that would be your functional architect for your application and your technical architect. You need to be working with the vendor manager, the vendor team, and maybe you're not doing the same level of integration as they might be doing, but you ought to know everything that they're doing and approving everything that they're doing side by side. So those are two people that I'd never try and pick up on KM at any point. They need to be starting together all the way through. The other thing I think that we underestimate in total is how much, is getting the right number of people. When you do a project plan and you lay out your staffing and everything else like that, you forget a lot of times at the vacation hours and all that kind of stuff. But it's the amount of administration and overhead that goes with decision-making, for example. If you're in a decision group that takes a lot of consensus, or people don't make decisions easy, or it goes across organizations, the amount of time that it takes you not to do the work, but to get the work decided on, never goes well into a project plan, and you should try and accommodate that when you're laying out the number of people that you need. I think that those kinds of things, those are two little kind of nits that I think might help you. Otherwise, getting, the vendor community has the same problem. No, that's not true. The vendor community has somewhat of a problem too, getting the resources that they have. Typically we can pay people more. Typically when we pay them, we can pay them to work more overtime. But it's still an issue where these resources are scarce, and sometimes you have to grow them.
I think we found one of the hardest problems, I'm sure most of you can attest to this, and so I would love to hear if this group has creative ways of helping with this. We have had the hardest problems with, I think on your technical side, there are positions all over the state. So people come in, they get a skill set, and on VoteCAL there's, huge demand, so they come in, they get a great skill set, and off they go to their next promotion. And on the business side, project work is demanding. It is hard. It is not I come in every day and I do the same job. I know what my job is, and I come in and I do it and I go home. It is, what is the fire today? And, oh, I thought I put that out and now it's back. And I don't like putting out fires every day, so I'm going back to the job I know that I'm comfortable with. And so, some of the tips that we have here is, make sure that you have training, good training plans, rotation plans, make sure you have a recognition system in place. You know, we have what we call our monthly Bird Dog Award, where you get the prime first parking spot and a little award and, you know, a recognition in our monthly newsletter that goes out. But, you know, project work is very hard on staff, and long-term projects are highly demanding on staff for a long time. And so I would love to hear from this group, and I think most of you would, if people have had success or have tips on how do you keep people from burning out and sticking with the long-term project.
I have one tip. It doesn't help in that way, but I can tell you this by working on SACS. So that was a 5 or 6 year child support effort that ended up in court. For the state side, I was deposed for 5 days, and I was on the stand for 5 days, because the 5 project managers before who actually were working on it all got sick. With stress, because projects can be really stressful. And one of the things that I notice on large projects where you have to expect some kind of turnover, it's really, really important that you have decision logs.
Yes.
Because people make decisions at contract time, they make decisions on which way to go. A new manager comes in and they relive it all the time, and you end up reworking because you didn't understand the projects that made, the decisions.
What made the decisions,
the decisions. So that's one tip, because turnover happens. I don't think it addresses quite your point, but at least it's a contingency plan for some of that.
So, what I've had a problem with in the past is the decisions outside the meeting, the hallway decisions, and trying to, number one, get that information and then documenting it. Good luck. So can you give any advice about that?
So at FisCal, we have actually put together what we call an operational decision-making framework. And it is a very detailed, we have a plan, it's a documentation, we have a SharePoint database. It details very clearly who can make what decisions at what levels. And you have to kind of, you know, here's the issue, here's the analysis, here's the level of decision. And when hallway decisions come up, or we, you know, assistant deputies, managers, supervisors, anyone becomes aware of a hallway decision, stop. That's an ODMF. You go log that. And it has just, it is our culture. We don't make decisions. They're ODMFs, just for that reason. Turnover happens, and I don't want to relive a decision that was made 5 years ago. We've been through that analysis. And for our project, because we're managed by multiple partners, everything is consensus. We don't have, as I always call it, the big talking head that gets to say, here's the decision. You know, we have to come to a consensus. And so I don't want to relive the conversation we had 5 years ago. I want somebody to go back, pull up the analysis, say, oh, here's the reason you made the decision, here's what you did. Decision, you know, done, move on, it was already made. So I really think you have to drive a culture. I think you have to have a framework. And if you come back this afternoon, you're going to get a copy of our framework. Because I really think it's really solid, and I think it's one of the, truly, I think it's one of the best things that FisCal has done. Is as an organization internally for ourselves, is build that framework. And I think you have to drive the culture that just says hallway decisions are not acceptable. We don't do it.
When they do it. That's
There
the
you
second
go.
part of it.
You just killed it. But I mean, you have to drive it all the way down and just say, we don't do that. You can't have undocumented decisions. You can't have hallway decisions. You can't, that is scope creep, that is cost creep, that is unmanaged contracts, that is, you can't do it. And it just has to come from the top, and it has to filter all the way down.
You know, on the staff retention side, we you know, Gerri said we face similar problems. Not quite the same, I won't say it that way. But it's, a lot of times it's a balance between the project needs or the company needs and the people's desires. But in the end, those people's desires is always going to win, right? They always have the option to go make the change. And we can say, keep doing this, and they say, sure, okay, I'll keep doing it. And they'll go home and they'll find a new job. Once somebody makes the transition to not wanting to do something anymore, or you see them starting to trend in that direction, we've done some rotation between projects, between roles on the project, whereas we've got a good person. We don't want to lose that person. We know one way or another we're likely to lose them in the role they're in, and we're going to have to replace them, but we'd rather keep them with our company or keep them with the project and not lose the institutional knowledge and not lose everything they've learned because we were too stubborn to change their role. And it's a really hard decision to make. It's a really hard decision to explain to your clients sometimes, or to your sponsors, why you're taking this development manager, this test lead, who's just instrumental and core to the process, and putting them somewhere else. But if you can explain the alternatives, sometimes it helps. And it's good to get that and make those decisions before it becomes an employee who feels like they have to put a gun to your head to make something change, because at that point they've probably made a decision they're going to leave. So you can't do it once they say, hey, we need to talk because I found a new job and I'm giving 2 weeks. It's too late by then. So you need to look for these things and see them coming. And a lot of times people aren't going to tell you they're coming, but it's very tough to try to see it coming and try to make that determination of, do I make a change with this person now, even though it's going to hurt me and it's going to hurt my project, but overall it'll be the better change for both of us. So that's one thing we've done before. It works well. It's not easy, but it's better than having them go work somewhere else. So. Any other comments on the staffing process? Yeah.
We were asking how do you motivate staff at Harvard. We had staff that are working 70, 80 hours a day, a week. And part of it was they kept it very well with Starbucks coffee, Pete's coffee, and people, that helps. You got to give people, the mental energy to be able to produce. And also bringing in dinner, for the staff that are going to be working 12 hours because they're really dedicated to doing their job. Little awards is great and stuff, but a lot of times, best way to someone's heart is through their stomach.
And I want to echo that a little bit. And it actually is going back to CalPERS. Quite a few years ago, CalPERS, besides the PSR projects, there was another major effort, which was to move into the new building, the data center. And so I was the project director over that. And so we had long hours. It was a long process. And there were weekends where we would have to work. And we brought in cots, we brought in food, we brought in coffee, we brought in anything that would keep the staff motivated. Yes, food definitely get to the right place. And the dedication that they demonstrate, your little bit of effort of just taking that stress level out of them for thinking, oh, where do I go to find dinner at midnight is really important. Just those little things. I think it's greatly appreciated, and it keeps the team together. It also was basically a tool that we thought of, and the benefit that CalPERS has is the funding for that. Not every department has that capability, right? So managers will have to be creative. Project managers will have to be creative to figure out how to make that happen.
And a lot of times that's just making people feel appreciated, right? You're not going to make up for it, because when they do the dollar equation, they're going to say, wow, I got 3 more hours of work for dinner. That's a pretty expensive dinner. But it's just making them feel appreciated, right? It's little things. When we were on child support, I learned that the McDonald's down the street, if you called ahead, would make you 100 cheeseburgers. And then we just come back to the office and just walk through yelling cheeseburger, and people pop up, put their hand up, and you throw them a cheeseburger. Sure, it's Friday night at 8 o'clock, and there's probably somebody on the other side of the phone who's not happy that they're there, but it just makes them feel like you recognize that contribution, and it helps a little bit. It doesn't fix it. There still needs to be an end goal. They still need to understand why they're working that hard, and that it will end at some point, but at least they recognize, oh, you know I'm here, and you know that I'm working hard. Yeah, comment.
Just to add on to some of his comments here, obviously delegation, I know this sounds like a cliche, but delegating some of your work, I know there are a lot of people just working hard, but the delegation and empowering staff, and also actually trust them, and let them make some mistakes. If there are mistakes, obviously, hopefully they're not costly mistakes, but obviously that's a learning process. So the culture that has to be, to kind of help our staff grow and also be accountable for what they do too. So some of these things, you know, sound like cliche, but I think some of these things we have to implement to help ourselves too.
Yeah, a lot of times things that sound like cliches actually work really well when you try them, right? It's really important that you hear those things and you go try them and then you realize, oh wow, people actually appreciate that. You know, giving them a safe environment which to fail. It's great, right? Other questions on staffing? Comments? Yeah.
So, kind of capitalizing on the certain expectation. Usually we do hiring interviews, and sometimes we don't tell staff, you know, people we're officials, people we're hiring, the expectations of the job. You're hiring people from other departments who work 8 to 5. You're not telling them about your project and the expectation, and they come in and you want them to work 12 hours.
Yeah.
And if you're not working, putting in 12 hours, you're writing them up. But having second interview to tell them about the job and make sure that before they accept it, they know what they're walking into, kind of helps.
Yeah, otherwise it's a great recipe for a 6-month employee, right?
I've had, especially with the managers, and I think she can attest, we have had second interviews with our deputies, very, very casual second interviews where it's just, let's be real clear. Here's what life is like here. And there are days when it's just not pretty, and there are long days. So that they know what they're walking into. And you know, you let them make an informed decision.
So what sells them?
I don't know, Chief, what sells you? Abdul, what sells you?
Well, I think at the end of the day, I mean, you know, we are, obviously the vision is very solid. I mean, we have strong leadership and really people are working hard, smart people there. I think that's, you know, that we see the end of the tunnel, you know, we see a great vision. So we are hoping, you know, this is the best project that we see here.
And I think our decision-making framework helps. It serves because now it empowers the lower level. People are the lowest to make certain decisions. So everything we have, we don't have to feel time all the way up. So that empowerment and having people make decisions, they feel like part of the organization.
Franchise is really good at dividing projects into small steps so they see success rather than, you know, whether it's tiering something in, whether it's waiving something in, whether it's breaking a project down. But if they break things down in components and they sign big boards, for example, and put everybody's name on it because everybody participated in this, I think that helps a little bit too.
Again, sounds potentially cliche, but the opportunity to do something big is really a motivator for people. You know, and we working in state government, we have the opportunity to do big things, right? And not all of our clients, not all of our end customers love us, but you pay child support in California, I built that system. You pay corporate taxes in California, I helped build that system. You file a paper tax return, my system helps scan that in and gets it in there. It's big things that touch people's lives, and the opportunity to make changes and to be part of something good in the state really does motivate a lot of people. But it can't be such a long-term vision that it's 8 years of just nothing but hard work all the time before you get there, because that's more immediate than the long-term goodness that people see.
I tell our employees, you know, just think, your children can be state employees working on a system you built. You know, you took them from the black screens with the little green numbers to, you know, a web-based system that they're gonna be able to use, that you can say, hey, I built something historic for the state. And I think that that's a lot of what people buy into. And if you can, that's that vision, that sharing, that evangelizing, no matter how big your project or small it is, evangelizing that vision to your end user and your project team from the beginning to the end, and reminding people what their goal is and their value that they're contributing to the end user, to the department. You know, most people work for a department because they're loyal. I mean, they you know, we're all here, most of us are here to collect a paycheck, but we're also here because we're loyal to what we're doing. I mean, otherwise you'd float around every 6 months to a new job. If you can evangelize that message, people buy into the message, and they appreciate the fact that they are contributing value. And that, I think, is really important. And so if you share that message with people and remind them of that and make them feel that they are really contributing value to it, it goes a long ways.
All right.